welcome everybody. We'll get this next session here started. Our first speakers will be Reghard Zweinenberg and Louis Carons. They're going to be speaking about the anti-malware testing Undercover. If you would please join me in welcoming them to the stage.
Yeah, thank you for joining us. Oh, we were still having a good conversation there. Hi, welcome. Anti-malware testing Undercover. Co-presentation, Louis Carons of Panda and me from ESET. Testing is always an interesting thing. It is controversial. People think it's controversial, and it will always be controversial. And we have seen like real testing is also really difficult if you want to do it like real-world components. If you saw Simon Edwards' presentation earlier yesterday, the things he has to do to make it like a real-world test, it's getting rather complex. And contrary to what people believe, it is highly complex. People think it is easy. It is not that easy. There are real challenges we have to face day to day to make it really good. But the technical details testers have to endure to do proper testing. That has been presented many, many times here at VB, and we decided not to do that. Louise and I actually came up to look to the problem using a different approach, how things are influenced. Because does testing influence things? Definitely it does. So, Louise will in a minute start with a short introduction on this, and we are going to look at how tests influence anti-malware development. Now, if you think this is going to be a battle to smash like testers, no. We're going to do it in a nice way and objectively as well, because we're also going to look how anti-malware vendors trying to influence tests.
Thank you, Reghard. Then we'll talk about one of my favorite topics, cheating. And we'll talk about some examples. Sometimes there is clear cheating, sometimes there's kind of a gray area in between. So we will discuss those. And finally, the conclusion. So let's go to the introduction. Testing has been covered at Paris Bulletin here many times, but we felt somehow that there was something missing. We didn't have like the whole picture of the testing. So that's why we came up with this presentation. Testing matters a lot. As Reghard was saying, it influences, and not just in security, but in all kind of things. And of course, my German friends in the first line are laughing now. But yeah, of course you all know what happened when you go to a test to obtain a certification and then you cheat, and then someone finds out. But there is more to this story. This was published exactly today, 1 month ago, in Reuters. And what it was most interesting was what you can read there. Tougher standards and testing methods will increase technology costs to the point where diesel is forced out of the market. So, yes, testing influences a lot.
It does, Louise. And how do tests influence anti-malware development? Because it is, from one end, always influencing the development of anti-malware products. And is that desirable? Sometimes, if it is really improving security and the protection for the end user, but it's not always that case. There are actually some cases that when anti-malware development is influenced by a test, it is just to be better in a test, which is not helping the end user. We're actually going to describe various scenarios where this has happened, where vendors were quote-unquote forced, because it's not like they're physically beating us. They'll try to do that with me, by the way. To develop certain characteristics in the product. Actually, not to have a better product from a security point of view, but just to have a better product in testing. Now, there's no problem for a test to influence the anti-malware development if it really is finding a loophole, a security issue, and actually makes the product better. But of course, it's not really helping if it is just to be better in a test and not helping the end user.
So, on-demand test, another of my favorite topics. So believe it or not, they are still happening. I mean, these all have stopped like 20 years ago, but still we see almost every day, or at least every month, new on-demand tests. It is true that most of the times they are just part of a number of different tests, but they are really useless in most of the cases. I do agree that for some reasons, it could be explainable that on-demand test has to be done. But to be honest, what I feel is like, if this was about beer, so an on-demand test is like Bud Light to beer. I mean, yeah, it's testing, but it's pretty useless. At least with the Bud Light, I've been told that you can get drunk. I couldn't manage that, but really. So you may think that I'm hating on-demand test. And yeah, you probably are right. Why is that? You cannot imagine the massive waste of resources during many, many years in all anti-malware labs. I mean, hundreds of malware analysts writing signatures just to have decent results in on-demand test. And that's the only reason. You would say, no, but you need to add signatures to your solution so you can protect your customers. Bullshit. I mean, sometimes you need to do that. But many times it's not like that. I mean, it's not only malware that is not in the wild anymore, but we're talking about malware that if it tries to get to the computer, you have like many different technologies that will block that, and that will never happen. But still, we have to waste time adding signatures for that. So that's how I feel about on-demand test and how it influences us. In this case, not that much in the development itself, but yes, on the daily work we have to do in the labs.
Good. So another type of testing that is done is performance testing. And well, this is my 24th VB, and I'm almost 30 years in the industry. And yes, I know in the real beginning, the performance overhead was like sometimes historical. Like there are known cases where a product slowed the system down to be a brick. The brick would be faster. But now everything, actually at that time, even performance testing was done with just an on-demand test. Well, that of course all got much better. Everything is done now with real-world components, which is much better because it gives you really, you can measure the overhead of a system, how much it will slow down. And performance is actually really important because it actually is influencing like test results. The readers will read it. It's affecting the users. And it so actually may also like demote you like in a test, may actually cost you some sales, which is not the right thing, of course. We all want to sell more and more. So for that particular reason, the money flow, there is actually a growing trend for products to improve their performance. There's nothing wrong with improving performance if it benefits the end user, but in those cases, it's actually just to improve performance in a specific test. Is that preferable? Not really. How can you do that? Because sometimes we see vendors optimizing specific performance tests only to be better in a test, but they are actually opening up a security hole in the system. So what we should do is actually to have an efficacy test. Do the performance test, but also try to see if it still is protecting you. Do the same test, but with relevant malware samples to see if it is detected, and then, yeah, then the performance increase is like, okay. But not if it's only to improve in the test and not improving the security or actually minimizing the security.
So real-world tests, those are the tests I like. So if on-demand test was Bud Light, a real-world test looks like that. Francis Kenner, my favorite beer. So why do I think these are the most relevant and one of the most important kind of tests? Because here the testers are trying to mimic what it is really happening in the world. So they are measuring the right thing. I mean, they are doing what the users are doing. And the better thing is that usually we, as vendors, we always want to be on the top. So one of our problems with testing, like in the on-demand testing I was saying earlier, is that if we have to devote resources to get a better result in a test, but that goes against protecting protecting better our customers, which usually happens, that's a huge problem. But with the real-world test, if it is performed properly, that means that to have a good result there, what you have to do is to protect your customers. And the better you do it, the best result you will have. However, that's in the ideal world, because it doesn't happen always. So we had a case, I won't name the tester. Well, actually, I don't remember which tester it was. But I remember the AB company because it was Panda. So in one of these real-world tests, once we had problems detecting a few cases. And they should have been detected. So we took a look at all the information we had. And we found out, OK, to do this real-world test, you need to do a lot of work as a tester. So testers either use third-party tools or use their own tools, which is fine. But in this case, the use of the tools implied that the behavior, it was similar, but not exactly the same as it happens in the real world. So, and that's why, in our case, we were not blocking a few threads. I remember we talked to that tester, and they said they didn't change anything. But we could actually see that they were doing it differently. Actually, it was the way it was downloading the samples into the computer, it was different. So we have to we have to modify our solution to take into account that use case, which has never happened in the real world. And it has never happened again in that tester because in the next test, it all came to normal.
Yeah, so we talked about the real-world components already and the on-demand test, but then we also have the default configuration, the so-called out-of-the-box configuration. Of course, you want to compare apples and apples and not apples and oranges, so testers can only use out-of-the-box configurations because that is what the anti-malware vendors actually suggesting for their users to be used to have the best protection. Well, right now, we already have seen a few known products that are actually out of the box performing better in tests, but not in real life. And where they are actually giving their users hints and tips on how to enable certain settings to get a better result and a better protection. But that would actually result in like less performance or less detection in the test. Which is interesting to see because you really want to compare it, but the default configuration, the out-of-the-box testing, which is basically the only thing anti-virus testers can do, is right now not apples and apples anymore.
Exploit detection. These are difficult to perform. Obtaining real-world exploits, make them work, and then test the different solutions against that. There is a bad light approach to this, which would be using Metasploit, which is not bad. And I think Simon yesterday made a good example of that. I mean, how using Metasploit could be really valid, and it makes sense in some cases. But what I think it should be avoided is to only base exploit detection on like default Metasploit use. Even though it's valid, I mean, adding detections to block those exploits is kind of really dumb. It's easy, and it doesn't prove anything. I mean, you can get, like, really, as a vendor, it's great for us. I mean, if testers want to do that, go ahead. It's easy to block those exploits, but it doesn't mean that you are protecting against real threats that users have to face in real-world scenarios.
Yeah, and then finding bugs. Testers find bugs, and sometimes they are not even like that important for the real world. A bug that appears when you have like 1 million infected samples on your hard disk, yeah, it happens. A bug is a bug, that's not a problem. It's not something that would be encountered in real life. But sometimes they actually do find other bugs as well. So it does influence the anti-malware development, but in a good way, because then we can fix the product. And if I go back in time, I used to work for a company called Thunderbyte, and there was at that time the editor of Virus Bulletin, Nick Fitzgerald, who was testing us. And every time we missed 3 or 4 or 5 samples of SMEC, polymorphic virus at that time. And whatever we did, when we received the sample, of course a replicant of that sample, we detected it and we couldn't figure it out. And it took me once a whole weekend to generate between 3 and 5 million SMEC samples, scanning them, deleting them when we detected them. And at the end of the weekend, I found 3 samples which we didn't detect. And it was a simple case of a jump below, which should be a jump below or equal. But it took me quite a while to figure that out. And that is one example where actually finding bugs, where a tester influenced the anti-malware development, because I really had to look into it and putting some resource in it, but it actually helped improving the security as well for the end user.
So going on with this, I think a very good example of finding bugs is the Malform Email project. Security researcher and anti-malware testing organization. Made a few years ago, they even published that here at Virus Bulletin. So they find a way that could be abused by cyber criminals to embed malware in email, and so email scanners couldn't detect it because it was malformed. So basically what they did back at the time was, okay, test how the anti-malware solutions were responding to that at the moment, then let them know, and give them a few months to fix that, test them again after those few months. Is this a good or a bad thing? I think it's a good thing. However, there are always two sides in every story, because you can say, no, I mean, that's clearly, if the bad guys would have found out that problem before, they could have abused it. So thanks to this, we fixed it, and that's true. It is also true that we all vendors in the world, actually almost all back then, we had to change our priorities in the development cycles that we already had in place. So who knows if we were delaying something that was even more important than that. So there is always two sides in every story, as I was saying.
Yeah, so we have been looking at how anti-malware testers influence the development, but we have to look at the other way around as well. Like I said, we're taking this different approach. So how do anti-malware vendors try to influence tests? If you ask yourself, do they? Well, yeah, they try. And for this, we actually asked a few of the testers for some input, like what they encounter, and we will go over that in a minute. Of course, it's not really good if you, as an anti-malware vendor, try to influence a test just to get better results.
It's not. Certifications. So we're not talking about competitive testing, but just certification. So imagine this scenario. A vendor, for some reason, I don't know, to sell their products, to access VirusTotal, whatever, needs a certification from a tester. So this vendor goes to the tester and said, okay, please, I want you to test my product, and because I want to have this certification. And then the tester does his job. And somehow the product sucked, and they didn't earn the certification. But the vendor really wants that certification, so says, okay, I really need that, so I will give you, I'm willing to pay a lot of money to get it. And the tester refuses it, and then the vendor goes to another tester, and in a few weeks, he has a brand new certification. So this is a hypothetical situation, or I wish it was, because it is not. And it has happened a number of times that I know of. So this is happening. Basically, it's kind of buying the certification, paying to get it. And it is happening.
Yeah. Oh. That's the next one. Hold on. I did it. So collections. Of course, any test needs collections. Otherwise, you cannot test against samples which are in there. And those are built by the tester themselves. Interestingly enough, of course, having access to the collection would be a key item for like root detections. And there are cases known of like vendors trying to ask a tester if they could sell the test set before the test, so they would have a good result when the real test is done. Well, that's not the right way to do it, of course. obviously you will have a good result, but it's not completely ethical. And there are actually all kinds of variants to that. And like I mentioned, we have asked testers for some input. And well, one of the testers at that moment actually said,
can you run a test in which we provide all the samples and you see how our product compares against the competition?
thank you, Simon. You have noticed actually that Luis and I mentioned Simon a few times. He promised us like bonus points in the next test. So, of course, that's a joke. It's but the next two tests. But there are other variations to this. Like can you do a test, for instance, with, like Simon just said, with the samples provided by a tester? Yeah, of course, that vendor will have like really good results. That's not a good way. And there were actually other interesting things, and I have to read them here because then I can quote them properly. And that happened while we were writing actually the paper. If you test us or publish the results you have already obtained, we will sue you. So that actually happens, that vendors try to threaten with a lawsuit against a tester. Or can you test this privately, and if the result is good, can you then make it public? It's trying to influence testers. Or if you do not change the results to be made more favorable, we will sue you. Which is, of course, a really bad thing if vendors really start to like do this to testers. Like, yeah, I mean, if you are not agreeing with the test result, and if it's a true result, yeah, live with it. But to start to threat them with lawsuits, that is not going to help the end user. Why would people do this? I don't know. But it is influencing tests. And you would almost think that goes towards cheating. Cheating, Luis said it's one of his favorite topics as well, so it's a favorite topic of mine. We all want to have the best results in tests. And, well, some products will actually cheat to be like the better one or the best one, which is not a real-life scenario. Well, we'll try to describe that.
Yeah, it happens. I mean, there are some cheats that are really clear, you know, like, and we have known them for many years. Like, after you're scanning a folder with malware, and after a number of hits, you start saying that everything is malware, so you obtain a 100% result in that crappy on-demand test, which that has happened. Creating specific special versions of your anti-malware solution to send to the test when the test protocol specifically says that it has to be a public version. So that, for me, for example, that's kind of clear cheating. There are some other more creative cheating things like detecting malware based on the file name. Because some testers name the files, I don't know, with the hashes, for example, the MD5 hash or whatever. So there are some vendors that decide to detect based on how the file name is actually. I mean, if you change the name of the file, it won't be detected anymore. I have seen things like disabling normal detection to increase speed during performance tests. Sometimes there are gray areas where you don't know if it is cheating or not. I remember we were doing some tests inside Panda with different competitors, and there was, so we were measuring the performance there. And one of them was really quick. I mean, we were like copying files from the network to the computer, and it was as having no antivirus. And actually, then we put some malware, and actually they were not detecting anything. So they were not scanning. Funny enough, if you put the ACAR file there, that was the only file in the entire world that they would detect. So is that cheating? I don't know. I mean, it's up to the vendor to decide which is the risk they want to take. And also, they have to do it like a quick antivirus product so people doesn't complain, doesn't turn it off. But well, those are gray areas. And there are similar cases like when you are on the same hard drive copying one file from one place to the other, they want to scan it, or on the same computer. A number of gray areas that could be or not considered cheating. So, cheating is wrong. I hope that's clear. Let's say it all out loud.
Good.
Very good idea.
Yeah. So, and when we actually start to look, well, cheating, let's look at a tester and a vendor side. And then look, for instance, again, I already mentioned the performance test. You want to do performance tests in a real life scenario. And people use their systems the whole day. And of course, everything is now measured using real-time components. But then to do a performance test while installing a productivity suite, does it really make that much more make that sense? Like hundreds of thousands of files being copied and being installed. If you ever try to install Office or OpenOffice or any large product, it takes minutes. Does it really matter if it takes 20 seconds more when it already took 8 minutes to install the whole product? No. And it's also not something that people are doing on a day-to-day basis. At least I am not installing Office every day. And it's also interesting to see that, what was that? Right, the reaction of some vendors. Some vendors actually, their reaction to tests is updating or upgrading their performance only to be better in a test. It's kind of cheating. When they see an installer being executed, they stop scanning. When they know a specific action is taking place, which is done by a tester, they stop scanning. So when you look at the overhead, it is hardly there, much better result.
Sample selection has always been a challenge. And this has happened, and well, it is actually happening. What if a tester is using samples that are never seen anywhere else in the world? Never. Would you call that cheating? Probably what the tester is doing is just modifying those samples. That could be one of the options to see how good antivirus are detecting if you modify the binaries. Maybe a third party, is poisoning their sample selection. Another kind of cheating could be like, how do you decide if something is malicious? I mean, if you are using antivirus engines, anti-malware engines to see if they say it is malicious or not, to make your sample selection for the test that is really biased, then I would say it's almost cheating, even if you don't want to benefit any specific vendor. If you take samples from vendors, those vendors could poison those samples or could add, I don't know, or false positives for other vendors and some other things. We're running out of time, so let's go.
Let's go quickly to the editor's choice. Yeah. Sometimes you see like tests are all about the winner and the loser, right? But we have seen cases where, like in a test publication, there was a winner and a loser, and in another magazine, suddenly it was with the same test set and the same tester, the results were exactly the opposite. The loser was the winner; he was the editor's choice. Well, there was some financial incentive there, because when you read through the magazine, they had free full-paid ads in that magazine, which is, of course, influencing, in this case, the editor. The problem, of course, is this cheating? Yeah, because they are the press. People buy a magazine to make up their judgments what to buy, and they believe that the editor or the test magazine actually is writing the truth. But in this case, it was just a financial incentive to make this product the editor's choice.
So, the final topic about cheating, cloud. I was telling Rieger, I have to talk about the cloud. As you know, I'm from Panda. We have been using the cloud like for many, many years, and really the adoption of the cloud has really blurred the line between what is and what is not cheating. And I'm afraid that many testers are not aware of what kind of information vendors do obtain. And it's like crazy. One thing I wanted to write in the paper, and I wasn't allowed, because Rieger is so politically correct. It's like, so as an anti-malware solution, you have to be deep inside the operating system. You are controlling everything. So my comparison is like a Trojan horse on steroids. And that's it. I mean, we have all the information. So at a certain point, like for the most biggest testers, the most reputable ones, they are doing like every month, every 2 months their test. And they first do the whatever real world and false positives. You know, and you can know when are they doing that, and you can know it in real time. And you could even modify the results in real time if you wanted. So it could be possible. So at the end of the day, cheating is becoming something that depends on the good faith of the vendor, which it's something I wouldn't put my trust in, to be honest. So these are the vendors that are watching the testers. Andrea's face is really scared now. So, okay, we're running out of time. We love these topics. As you know, we both are involved in AMTSO. We are going to have a meeting in Malaga in a few weeks where we will be discussing this kind of stuff, among many others. If you want to know more, there is a booth. Jamie is there, and you can have more information. So, thank you very much.
Unfortunately, there's no time for questions, so if everyone will please join me in thanking Breghart and Lewis.